Hello, my name is Vincent Diemunsch. I work for the French Cybersecurity Agency. Let me present you the formal security analysis of OPC UA that I realized with Lucca, Hirschi and Steve Kremer at Inria. The protocol OPC Unified Architecture is an industrial control system protocol that is used to command and control automation devices. Typically, an operator at a client workstation in a control room can interact with a SCADA server that supervises an industrial process. The SCADA itself is the client of many automation devices, such as programmable logic controllers, that act as small servers. OPC UA version 1.4 is standardized as IEC 62541 and has built-in security. Therefore, it is often recommended by government cybersecurity agencies for safety-critical infrastructures, such as nuclear power plants, power grids, air traffic control, oil and gas installations, etc. Here is an overview of the OPC UA binary protocol. Each agent, the user, the client, or the server, is equipped with a certificate issued from a public key infrastructure and the associated secret private key. The client first opens a secure channel with the server to guarantee message integrity and optionally confidentiality against an active attacker on the network. The client uses asymmetric cryptography in the open channel subprotocol to derive a set of symmetric keys denoted SK for the secure channel identified by IDC. These keys are used for message authentication codes and encryption. The client then creates a session on the server. The create session subprotocol is transiting in the secure channel IDC, and therefore it is protected at least in integrity by the symmetric keys SK. This is illustrated in the figure by the fact that create session is framed with double vertical bars that mention in superscript the channel ID and symmetric keys. The server returns a new session authentication token that will be used by the client to identify the session in all the forthcoming requests. The user activates the session by logging in to send requests and get responses. The client sends through the secure channel an active session request that identifies the session with a session authentication token and contains a signature of the user computed with the user private key. If the server accepts to activate the session, each new request sent in the secure channel with this session authentication token will be associated to this user. The protocol state machine is quite complex for various reasons. First, a secure channel needs to periodically renew its symmetric keys, and that is done by reopening the channel. Then, a session can be reactivated by another user. Indeed, sessions are handed over to new operators at shift change. Finally, a session can switch to a new secure channel for better reliability, precisely to overcome the loss of a secure channel. The question we asked ourselves was, what about message authentication and confidentiality when an active attacker is on the industrial network and has a few compromised long-term keys? On the topic of OPC UA security, we found as related work the OPC UA security analysis of the German BSI in 2022 and two formal analyses of version 1.3 on partial subprotocols. The first one, conducted with the tool ProVerif, examined the establishment of secure channel symmetric keys in RSA only. The second one, conducted with the tool Tamarin, proved the flow integrity property of secure channels, but without considering key establishments. Our contributions in the present work consist of providing a formal model of version 1.5 with user sessions in both RSA and the new elliptic curve cryptography. developing automated proofs of security properties, and responsibly disclosing 5 new attacks and 3 weaknesses to the OPC Foundation. ProVerif is a cryptographic protocol verifier developed at Inria that works in the symbolic model. The formal model of the protocol is specified as parallel processes in applied pi calculus. An example of such a process is presented as illustration on the right-hand side of this slide. Messages are terms constructed with functions and atoms. Here, for instance, a nonce is encrypted by the server public key and transmitted with a client certificate whose associated private key is used to sign the message. The attacker follows the Lebesgue model. That means that it intercepts messages to analyze them and forges new messages based on terms it knows. However, the attacker cannot break expressions. The hash of a private key does not give access to the private key itself. Terms are reduced using an idealized cryptography. For instance, here a message M encrypted with the public key CPK can be decrypted with the associated private key CSK. ProVerif, although a state-of-the-art verifier, has some well-known limitations that make verification hard to perform. Indeed, the verification problem is undecidable in the general case. Hence, the prover may not terminate its resolution, and in that case keeps running until memory is exhausted. Or when it terminates, it may not be able to conclude, ending neither with a proof nor an attack. Here is an overview of the formal analysis that we made with ProVerif. To analyze OPC UA, we started with the specifications and developed a formal model of the protocol in pi calculus that considers long-term key compromises. We encoded the properties of message authentication and confidentiality as ProVerif queries. It resulted in one of the largest ProVerif models ever studied, where parts are selectable through a configuration mechanism. After a year of work, it slowly became obvious that state-of-the-art techniques were insufficient to ensure termination of the resolution. A new proof methodology was required that consists in breaking the main loops that appear during resolution thanks to added constraints on the selection function, and providing the required information through lemmas. These lemmas were specified as axioms during the resolution of the main property, but were also later proved as separate queries on the same configuration. Overall, this preserved the soundness of the results. This methodology allowed ProVerif to terminate either with a proof of the property for a given configuration or with an attack trace. In the latter case, fixes to the specifications have been proposed to the OPC Foundation. It was one of the most complex ProVerif formal models ever studied. Firstly, the size of the model, when regarding the unfolded process generated by the solver after passing, is 8,600 lines of code in applied pi calculus. Secondly, about 2,300 initial horn clauses are generated at the start of the resolution. These figures are higher than, for instance, those of the model of TLS 1.3 presented in the article of Bhargavan et al. At CCS 2022. Our first idea to mitigate this complexity was to use modularity. The different parts of the model are activated thanks to a configuration. The configuration allows to select the cryptography, either RSA or elliptic curves, and the channel security mode, either only message integrity or both integrity and confidentiality. It allows to select the supported user credentials, like login and password or certificates, and also the level of session security. Regarding the attacker capabilities, one can choose the kind of key compromises, like known or only long-term keys. We also allowed for simplifications to disable the most demanding features, namely channel reopening and channel switching. Overall, we ended up with 7,056 different possible configurations. To explore all these configurations, an iterative approach using Python scripts has been taken. Here is an example of a configuration expressed as a string argument of the proof script. The script computes each possible sub-configurations that are contained in this maximal configuration and orders them in a lattice of configurations for efficient exploration. Indeed, configurations can be organized as a lattice because it is possible to define a partial order between them. A configuration C is considered inferior to another configuration C' if it has less protocol features or corresponds to a weaker threat model than C'. A proof of a property obtained on a configuration will be true on all inferior configurations. Conversely, an attack found on a configuration will exist on all superior configurations. The exploration of the lattice of configurations on the computing server was highly parallelized. Furthermore, we made iterative explorations by increasing timeout delays. Nevertheless, we had too many cases of non-termination due to the complex state machine of the protocol. Therefore, a new methodology was required, and this methodology, combining state-of-the-art features of ProVerif, is the following. First, identify the main loops that appear during resolution. Then, break each loop by adding proof hints that redefine the selection function guiding the proof search. This should lead to an inconclusive result, neither proof nor attack, because the prover cannot identify the origin of a term anymore. Then, iteratively add lemmas to provide the information required to conclude and assume them as axioms. In our model, more than 100 lemmas were required. Finally, prove lemmas separately of the main query for the same configuration but with different proof hints. This methodology preserves the soundness of the tool. If the solver concludes that a query is true, then there is indeed no attack. Regarding practical results, first, using ProVerif, we were able to discover new attacks. Thanks to attack reconstruction, the traces are convenient to review even for people who are not specialists in ProVerif. Using our new methodology, we were able to prove the security properties for configurations unaffected by attacks. However, the prover is still inconclusive for the most complex configurations of the model. We managed to find 5 new attacks and 3 weaknesses that were responsibly disclosed to the OPC Foundation through a vulnerability report, tickets, and meetings with the security group. The Foundation acknowledged and has fixed them in the latest release candidate version of the specifications, however, through new security policies. Many attacks were due to a lack of binding between sessions and secure channel. Here is an illustration of one of the most striking attacks, a session hijack by reopening a secure channel in side mode. The threat model supposes that the attacker on the network has compromised the client certificate. The client opens a secure channel in sign mode. That means without message confidentiality, only with message integrity. Then it creates a session, which is activated by the user. The attacker has compromised the client certificate, which means that he is in possession of the associated client private key. Hence, he is able to initiate the renew of the channel symmetric keys, and he succeeds because the server does not require proof of knowledge of the previous keys. At that point, the attacker can simply send any request to the server in the secure channel, provided that it mentions the session authentication token, which is publicly known from the previous messages, because this secure channel does not provide confidentiality. There is a major authentication violation here, because the server receives the request allegedly from the user on the client machine, but the user never sent it. It was sent by the attacker. The attack root causes are the 2 following design flows. First, there is no binding between the channel keys before and after the renewal. Therefore, the attacker can simply impersonate the client even if the attacker ignores the symmetric keys that were used when the session was created or activated. Second, there is no ownership proof of the session. The session authentication token was public because the secure channel was not encrypted, so it suffices to the attacker to send a request with this session authentication token to let the server believe that it comes from the user on the client machine. In the paper, we provide a summary of all attacks and weaknesses that were reported to the OPC Foundation. For each reported attack or weakness, we provide the violated security property and the attack trace, the threat assumption in terms of compromised keys, the smallest vulnerable configuration, the practical security impact, the root cause, often a design flaw. As we've just shown, it was a lack of authentication secrets. And finally, potential remediations, proposed fixes, mitigations, or enhancements of the protocol specifications. To conclude, 5 new attacks and 3 weaknesses were discovered and responsibly disclosed to the OPC Foundation. There are still ongoing discussions with the OPC Foundation regarding the fixes. Nevertheless, we managed to prove the security properties for many unaffected configurations. More precisely, we proved the injective agreement between client and server upon user requests and responses, and the perfect forward secrecy of secure channel keys in elliptic curve cryptography. However, the full proof of the new security fixes proposed by the OPC Foundation remains to be done for all configurations. For that, the ProVerif model is available and the verification is reproducible. Thanks for watching.